Hey, Douglas, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to have you. There's so much going on in the world, and I want to talk about all the things that are happening in and around the CIA, national security, from what's happening in Iran to directed energy weapon technology at a high level, all this cool stuff. And you're the perfect person for this. But I just really want to start with letting people know who you are and then diving into your background and some of the tradecraft that you're an expert in.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me here and speaking to your audience this morning. I served with the CIA's clandestine service for over 34 years. I joined in 1984, which is still the height of the Cold War, and I retired in 2019. And I spent most of my career with the agency overseas in foreign postings. My job was case officer, an operations officer, and a case officer, and I'm sure your audience is well aware, those are the people who recruit agents and handle agents principally. That's their main job, which is why I wanted to write a book called Recruiter, right? After I retired in 2019, I got the itch to teach. I actually served as an instructor and a course curriculum developer at our Helm Center, which is our undisclosed location that anybody in the world could find out about by looking up on the web. I taught there for a couple of years. I really enjoyed it. So I enjoyed teaching, I enjoyed writing, and I think that sort of led to my pathway after leaving the agency. I spoke at a time Russian, French, and to some extent Arabic. I'm lucky to speak English these days at an understandable level because you got to really maintain those hard languages. And I served most of my career in the Middle East, South Asia, and what I'm allowed to say are the former Soviet republics.
Okay, awesome. No, I mean it's a storied career. Um, I was hoping maybe we could take a step back though and just talk about your journey to the CIA, and then we can dive into your career and this book, The Recruiter, uh, spying in the lost art of American intelligence. It's such a perfectly timed book in terms of this conversation, and I'm just excited to talk about it. So maybe you could tell us about your journey to the CIA.
Yeah, my journey story is definitely a bit of the Stone Age, right, for your contemporary viewers. This was before the days of the internet. There weren't cell phones, and the agency tended to find people more than people found the agency. Nowadays, there's a website. You go on CIA.gov. It outlines how to apply to the agency. It gives a description of the different occupations, whether it's in the director of operations, which is where I served my career, which is the collection end, or the directorate of analysis, which is the production where they take the intelligence and they come up with final intelligence, right? Assessments, judgments, and that kind of stuff. So I was going to school. I got bored with college, so I joined the Marine Corps. My family persuaded me to go as a reservist, so I'd be able to, like, after 6 months, kind of review, hey, was this such a good idea? And after 12 weeks at lovely Parris Island, I decided, boy, my family was really smart. I'm really proud of having been a Marine and still being a Marine, a foreign Marine, but it just wasn't going to be the right fit for me, as we in the U.S. government like to say as a term. So I went back to school, got really interested in international relations, foreign policy, and I was lucky enough to be exposed to a professor who, a little bit like me, he was an adjunct. This guy was a retired career Foreign Service officer. So he'd been an ambassador a few times. Cool guy. He was a World War II era Marine. He fought on Iwo Jima. He looked like something out of a movie, right? And I thought, well, I want to be this guy. So I was pursuing the Foreign Service, right? I was taking the Foreign Service exam, not getting through. And what I didn't know at the time was my professor, having been a foreign ambassador, had maintained contact with the agency because one of his last jobs was to be on our delegation at New York at the United Nations. So he sees somebody interesting, a Russian Chinese official, and he kind of like highlight that chap or chapette to our folks. Well, he also highlighted me to them. And so I was working a bunch of different jobs, going to school full time, driving a cab, working as a cashier in a department store, working as a janitor in a hospital, all really high prestige jobs, but good work. And they paid the bills. And one morning in between shifts, phone's ringing. I was going to go to sleep, so I had to go to work that night. And I pick up the phone, And the person who answered or was calling on the other end said, "I'm a United States government official, and I'd like to talk to you about a job fair." So, okay, I was a college senior at the time. I was going to graduate in a few months. Didn't really know for sure what I was going to do. I was thinking of going back in the Corps, but with a commission, which they'd been trying to encourage me to do to stay in the Marines. And I went to this job for not knowing what it was until I got there. And I didn't really come appropriately dressed, to be honest, because I was going to go to work afterwards. So I had on like a sweater and jeans, and everybody else in the room is like, they're all like so well dressed and got suits and ties. The ladies are in dresses. And the guy comes in, and he's got a nice suit on. And he goes, what I'm here to talk to you about, ladies and gentlemen, is a career in the Central Intelligence Agency. And I was like, what the what? So he gave an info briefing. They do kind of that now, but you know what you're going into. And I pursued it. I took their test. We still kind of take similar tests these days. People, your listeners, you take something called the PAP-B, Professional Aptitude Battery Test. You take all these other tests, which are like, would you rather be sitting on a lake or in a hotel or whatever? Try to get a sense of who you are as a person, right? Weird stuff, but it kind of makes sense after a while. And I did it well enough that they offered me a job. And so I started out not really knowing what I was getting into, but turned out it was a perfect fit. I mean, I grew up in New York City, in the inner city, very blue collar family, blue collar roots, and, very much somebody who I thought got by with like being clever, not being intelligent so much as you would. And my ability to deal with people, right? But all types of people, from different walks of life. And that was like the perfect fit. The difference was taking all that, using all that to be able to develop relationships with people where they trust you sufficiently that you can, dare I say, use the word manipulation, manipulate their drives, their interests, their needs, principally their motivations, and persuade them to spy for the United States. So my journey a little bit different than what folks see today. It's much more straightforward in the sense of you know what you're doing, you know what you're getting into. You just have limited information on what the job is and what the job entails, even when you go through the process.
Okay, so you go into the CIA from your janitor job. um, you, back then, did you really know what the CIA was? Like, is it, now we have all these movies and all this stuff, but back then, was there a lot of, pop culture references to the CIA?
It wasn't like today, Nick. There's like a gazillion books. Mine, of course, being the best of them. But there's all these books, all these foreigners who've like written or currently speak. The agency was still kind of a secret thing. I could actually flash back and remember in the early '80s watching some news program, and there was a big news thing about how the secretive CIA is actually looking for recruits because this were the Reagan years, right? So there was a definite buildup on the national security side, on the military side. And the agency coming out of the '70s was really whittled down. A lot of your listeners, I'm sure, are aware of the church committee hearings and some of the excesses that the agency was involved with during those days, spying domestically, some of the things they did, which led to oversight, essentially, right? House and Senate oversight led to Executive Order 12333, which forbids the agency from spying on Americans and doing all these dirty tricks and stuff like that. So the agency was trying to rebuild and hiring people. It still was kind of secretive. So it didn't have the brand it has today. Now I'll tell you, most of the movies and the books, they're fun, they're entertaining, they're really inaccurate, like Homeland or whatever, but they're fun, right? But James Bond, did he ever like fill out a travel accounting? Did he have to worry about, you know, having receipts for the hotel he was in and stuff like that? The reality is it's a bureaucracy like anything else, but it is a spy service and it is elite. And I believe it does super cool things, but I didn't know that in 1984.
Okay, and then moving into your book, you go through CIA, you have this big career, and now you're out and you're teaching the next generation of potentially intelligence professionals at Georgetown. What are the contents of your book? What are the main themes in the book that you'd like to inform people about?
So My book sets out to make a couple of points. One, it's let's look at what the life of a spy really is. I mean, it's not the movies, it's not the books. There's heart palpitating moments for sure and adrenaline moments, but there's also like raising kids, getting a mortgage, the restraints and limitations you deal with by serving undercover, and particularly earlier in your career under deeper cover because cover roads over time, all the bad guys kind of know who you are after 10, 15, 20, 30 years, right? So that really impacts your life. So my book is a lot about the relationships that a spy cultivates to recruit agents. How does that happen? Why do people spy? When you think about it, considering the consequences of spying and the cost, right? So I write about the relationships, I write about what it's like, and I speak of it kind of to quote one of my friends at college, Jim Waller, who likes to use the term soul catching. And there's really something to that, right? Because, you don't go up to somebody, I don't go up to a Russian official at a cocktail party and go, hey, I'm Doug Lennon, CIA, want to spy for me? That doesn't work particularly well. It's more like bumping into a Russian official riding our bikes on a trail and finding out we both have some common interests. And there's some serendipity to our contact and some reason that has nothing to do with our jobs, nothing to do with spying, that allows me to maintain contact, during which time I'm trying to develop a relationship where my target sees me as not just a friend, but ultimately a confidant, and even sort of like a father confessor, a no judgment kind of place where he could kind of bare his or her soul. And that's a lot more art than science, though, and I know we'll get to it, but yet science is increasingly influencing how we spy because of technology, and how technology is a threat, but also a tool. So that's kind of principally where my book goes, with war stories, which are sterilized, to protect the agents and such. I can't say exactly what country I'm in at any time. I'll talk about a region. I have to be careful in my descriptions of people. I mean, this goes over the course of 4 decades. So, the earlier days, some of those people are, you know, gone, better places, whatever, but you still have to be careful. But I also make the point based on the time in which I wrote the book. So the book came out in 2021, which was right in the height of COVID, which is, awesome for commercial interest, just to let you know. But it came out in 21. We had just begun to try to, if not close the door on the war on terror, to sort of recalibrate our priorities and recalibrate our focus. And there was a great deal of reflection in terms of, we spent 20 years, lots of money, we killed a lot of people, prevented another 9/11, thank God, of that magnitude, but we had terrorism. But was that always the best way to be investing the heart and soul of our national security apparatus? And my argument was no, that terrorism's horrible. We had to, mitigate the threat, but I think we went a bit to the extreme at the cost of competing with the Russians and the Chinese and keeping up with technology and focusing on evolving our tradecraft to not only address this ubiquitous technical surveillance aid, which is the term we'll use, and I'm happy to discuss that more, but the way we were fighting in the shadows, because we were fighting in the shadows. The Russians were developing this hybrid war concept, gray zone tactics. I know a lot of your audience will like that term, where all measures kind of short of war, packages blowing up and turning to fire at our DHL warehouses before they get on a plane, assassinations, um, cyber attacks, right? Gray zone tactics, which ultimately we could trace back. Yeah, we're pretty sure it's them, but that are deniable. And we were so focused on terrorism that I think we were a little bit late on investing and catching up. Now, I'll say with great satisfaction, I think since the time I wrote my book, regardless of the administration, Biden or Trump, we reoriented ourselves. We're focused more on existential threats as the priorities. Who can destroy America? Terrorists could do a lot of terrible things. They can't destroy America, at least not, physically. So I think we've invested more in being better at stealing the secrets we need to inform our decision making, to defend against threats, and also to leverage opportunities that we can contrive for ourselves. So those I would tell your audience are the two main themes of the book. I'd like to think that lots of people in both the last two administrations obviously read my book and thought, yeah, that's a great idea. We should do that. But I think it was just common sense. I think it was logical at the time. And I'm just happy to see we're, on a better direction.
So, am I correct in saying that the thesis was that, I mean, the subtitle is The Lost Art of American Intelligence. Is it that we lost our edge because of this chase for terrorist A, B, C, down the laundry list, that we lost our edge to China and Russia? And then where are those areas where you believe we lost our edge? Like, where are we still playing catch up?
During those 20 years, we were more focused on covert action than foreign intelligence collection. And I think that shifts an organization culturally, but also it shifts an organization in terms of how they develop their personnel. So, when I was a baby spy growing up, I spent my first three tours overseas under very deep cover, and all I did was recruit agents. Now we were fighting two wars in after 9/11. We, were in Afghanistan. We'd soon thereafter be in Iraq. And so we were stretched thin as much as we grew, and we did. Now I would tell you that couple of years, it's been a couple of years after 9/11. What's now the Counterterrorist Mission Center at CIA was Counterterrorist Center at the time, was at that time bigger than the entirety of the Directorate of Operations that I joined in 1984. So we had a lot of people, but instead of, officers coming out of training and being sort of nurtured to learn the art of spying, a lot of them, because we needed bodies, had to be sent to Afghanistan, had to be sent to Iraq. And that wasn't really a place to learn the craft. We collected foreign intelligence there, but it was very different. A lot of it was from behind big walls, and we brought people to us. It wasn't about nurturing people as much as handling volunteers of information, if you would. So I think we lost a bit of our elitism in being a really elite foreign intelligence, a really great spy service. We knew how to spy. We knew tradecraft. We knew how to recruit agents. We knew how to handle them securely. I mean, tragedies happen and we lose people even with the best of efforts. But we didn't sort of nurture those officers over those 20 years or their leaders over those 20 years. It was more about find, fix, finish, right? That was the mantra. We're going to go and deter, terrorism by preempting it, which means finding people, putting them on an X, and neutralizing that, right? If I can say euphemistically.
Sure.
So we were still collecting secrets, but just a resource game, right? So we weren't, we didn't have enough people focused on that. We didn't have enough budget for it. We weren't looking at tradecraft innovation. We weren't looking at, wow, how do we deal with CCTVs all over? How do we deal with biometrics? How do we deal with, DNA scans and retina scans and all this kind of stuff? So I think we were losing our art of American intelligence or during that time because we just weren't investing. And then, there were crusty old guys like me who had to be in both camps. I mean, I was in all those war zones. I did those things. I spent a lot of time hunting terrorists. My last headquarters job was as essentially chief of the Al Qaeda target, right, for South and Southwest Asia. That's all the war zones, including in Iran. But I was always still recruiting agents, and that was, that was my, core belief and stuff. But you just, didn't have the opportunity to develop officers to have those same opportunities and those same experiences. I see the change after 2020, and that's continued to today, again, under both administrations, where we're getting back to all that. We're getting back to being a spy service, stealing secrets, mm, training, nurturing, developing people to do that, and being the best in the world at. But it takes time, and we did lose a little bit of time, and I think we got beaten up a little bit for a time. But just by virtue of what I see in the press, which is so generous of what they put out there in terms of intelligence and such like that, we're doing okay, right?
That's a perfect segue to what I wanted to ask about, which is this kind of shift from covert recruitment to overt recruitment. I think it was recently the CIA's, not only do they have a podcast, they have a Twitter, x.com account, what have you, and they're openly recruiting Persian people to work for them and against the Iranian regime. What do you think about that shift in tactics?
It's pretty awesome, but let me give you some context
Sure.
to it. So for one thing, covert influence, which is part of covert action, is a dicier issue today because the world is smaller based on technology, media, communications. So in the 80s, the 90s, even the early 2000s, if the CIA was charged with conducting a covert influence operation to try to literally affect the hearts and minds, right, or make the regime worried about something, or what have you, we could, plant newspaper articles, news programs, videos, we could hire foreign journalists and all that kind of thing. With the proviso that none of that could come back in US media because that's against the law, because then we're actually putting out false information which can influence US public opinion. And that's illegal. Executive Order 12323 lays that out, and it's
Sure.
in some other places. So we have a bit of a bigger challenge in covertly influencing a people, a government, because all roads lead back with the internet. Your phone, everybody's a reporter.
Right.
So now you see the CIA declassifying intelligence. It's real intelligence. It's not made up. It's not fabricated. It's sterilized a bit, right? But in 2022, it said the Russians are going to invade for sure, and here's why. And that was all based on real intelligence. In 1981, the then Soviets were about to invade Poland to crush Solidarity, which was a labor movement that eventually helped Poland get its freedom, break away from the Soviet orbit, and such like that. And even though it's dated, I have to be kind of careful about talking covert action. But we had covert action there to, one, support the Polish people, but also to expose what the Soviets were going to do so that the world would rise up and be angry. This was a time when the Soviets were trying to keep US intermediate nuclear missiles out of Western Europe. It was in Western Europe. The US was trying to get the missiles there so we could do covert influence. Today, we need to be legit and honest for the most part, but we could do it because we could basically take secrets and go, aha, see, you can vet it yourself. Here they are. Here's what their planning is. Here's what they're going to do, which is pretty cool. So kind of coming back to the videos, if you look at the videos, particularly the easiest ones to contrast and compare are the Russian and the Chinese one. There's now in Iran in Farsi too, but it's not as targeted as the Russian and the Chinese ones. The Russian and the Chinese ones are fabulous. Um, it's essentially broadcasting an appeal to what we've assessed to be the motivations of those people with access to intelligence who might be willing to cooperate with US intelligence. And they're really different because they're very targeted. So if, if you look at the Russian one, I speak Russian a little bit still anyway, and I had a better friend who made sure I understood the exact translation. It is like video images of Soviet cosmonauts going to space and their art and their history and their successes. It's all patriotic. And it's basically going, look at what your ancestors have fought and died for to make your great country great. Look at what this petty, cheap, horrible elite is doing and what they're going to do to your country, to your history, to your culture, to your children. It is exactly like straight out of a pitch that I've made to a Russian. I mean, it is spot on because the Russian cases that we could talk about that are out in public now, for some for terrible reasons that they were caught, and some for good reasons we were able to exfiltrate them. They defected afterwards. These are people who mostly spied for patriotism. Most of them didn't want to come to America. They just loved Russia, hated the then communist regime in the Soviet days, and then Putin's kleptocracy today, and they wanted to do something about it. The Chinese videos are different, and they're even more targeted. There's Chinese language, Mandarin language videos target at senior officials and then at junior officials. The senior officials, there's a lot of imagery of empty seats, right? The purge, all the purges, right? They're purging all these high ranking officials because either Xi doesn't trust them, he's paranoid, he's saying it's corruption, maybe it is corruption, but they're all disappearing. So it's like, you're kind of rolling your dice, senior Chinese official. You might need a lifeboat and we could be it. And then there's another set of videos which are more for lower level people. And you have imagery and language about them being taken advantage of by these high level elites with their homes and boats and cars. And meanwhile, these younger folks are working like dogs and getting nothing. It's a bit more transactional. Those are excellent and really, really well done. And they come from Target. They are based off, here's what we assess our target looks like, and here's our best angle to get somebody in that world to consider taking the risk of spying for us. And the Farsi ones are trying to do the same. I expect that we'll see more sophisticated ones like the Russians and the Chinese ones. Right now, it's more just like Farsi language things, letting people know how to get a hold of us. I'll tell you honestly, Iran was one of my areas of specialty. We never had problems recruiting Iranians. We had problems running them because, it's a dangerous, hostile place there. But there are always Iranians who are angry at the regime because Iranians are very nationalistic. They have an incredible history and culture. And the regime basically tries to whitewash that because it's a Shia revolutionary regime. It's
Mhm.
not an Iranian nationalistic government. So a lot of trends that are nationalistic actually undermine religious control. And they're aware of that. And so we're able to appeal to that still. And it's certainly always been rather effective.
Well, I want to stay on Iran for a second because obviously, look at what's happening. Right, we're now moving massive amounts of military assets into the area. Um, I saw recently on a podcast, John Kirkow, former, I don't know, colleague of yours, maybe many years ago, a CIA officer mentioned that. Now, his claim was that there might be a false flag operation to have, a hypersonic missile hit a U.S. aircraft carrier to trigger World War III. A little extreme, in my opinion. My question is not that. My question is, this concept of escalation. Now, you were running agents in Iran during, and also have experience in wartime based on what you've revealed today. How does that shift from, we're trying to get information, spy before things hit the fan, right? You mentioned that gray zone. What are those things that are likely happening right now that we either should be doing or need to be doing to maybe prevent a world war?
Iranians, whether they're the Shia clerics who run the government, the IRGC, or whomever, have a history of pragmatism. Not necessarily that they work and play well with others, but they're practical and they're realistic. So their engagement of the United States has generally been asymmetrical. You know, they know that conventionally we're, the United States. But they don't aim to fight us toe to toe. In fact, they do their worst when they're launching ballistic missiles and such like that. They do their best when they're hiding in the gray zone, as they did in Lebanon in the 80s, in my day, in South America in the 80s and 90s, and building asymmetrical means to create pain for the United States as leverage. Now they've lost a lot of that, to be honest, right? Their axis of resistance and stuff was based on, you've got Assad and the Alawi, who are essentially Shia. You've got Hezbollah, who might as well be, an extension of the IRGC in Iran. You've got Hezbollah's international infrastructure for conducting operations in terrorism, which they did with tremendous success through the early 2000s, right up until maybe it had something to do with Imad Muniyah no longer living after he was blown up by a car bomb in Damascus in 2008. But they've always relied on asymmetry because they're not going to like send out their ships to fight our ships and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, they do the speedboats. They've got they've got decent anti-ship missiles and such like that, but they're not going to win militarily a war. But they want to bleed us if they can. They want the ability to, have Americans wake up and go, oh, 12 American air crewmen died in Iran in these attacks, because in America, that'll have a huge effect, right? It has, at least in my lifetime, post Vietnam lifetime. So their tactics have been asymmetrical. Now, one, they've lost a little bit of that, and two, they veered away a little bit from that because the IRGC got a little overconfident, if you ask me. And I think one thing Americans, it might help them understand, is even the Iranian regime, there's no, good, bad, reformers. They're all hardline, but at the same time, they're not homogeneous. They all don't think the same in terms of strategy and tactics. So historically, they've looked to prick us, right? And create pain. But I believe the younger generation of the IRGC likes to think it can flex its muscles and can fight conventionally a little bit toe to toe. And they just got wiped out by the Israelis. And we obviously, the United States, had some rather directed, targeted hits on their nuclear infrastructure. But some of the people, if you would, and this is kind of ironic, who were sort of keeping them in check, the Israelis killed. The chief of army staff was a former IRGC officer. In fact, not former, he was an IRGC officer. Really smart guy. He grew up on the intel side of the IRGC. He created their counterintelligence element. He recrafted their strategy to be a lot more confrontational. If you swing back a little bit in time, 2018, the attack on Aramco in Saudi Arabia, unprecedented. That was the Iranians attacking. You could say, oh, it was the Emmys. It wasn't the Emmys. It was the Iranians. And we didn't do anything. The United States didn't respond. And that really emboldened him, but they also emboldened his following, which pushed for more aggressive tactics. I think the IRGC very much wants to have a very capable deterrent, which would suggest maybe they'd like to have a nuclear capability, right? But right now, the regime is entirely in survival mode. And it may not seem obvious because they seem kind of provocative. They, closing down the Straits of Hormuz for military exercises, almost baiting us to attack, because an attack is not going to collapse the regime. At least that's my opinion. Right? Just from
Well,
having,
the right attack would it not?
I don't think so, because
If we took out the Ayatollahs completely? No?
there's 90 million Iranians, right?
Yeah.
10 million of them have guns. You kill the Ayatollah, you kill every general and such like that. You still have the larger part of 10 million very committed Iranians with guns who will stay the course, and they will. And they don't care about killing other Iranians who they don't even see as their brothers and sisters. They're apostates, or they're threats to their their lifestyle, because The IRGC takes very good care of themselves. It's very corrupt. They run all the business. They have all the money. They have all the resources.
Is it safe to say it's like a internal? It's almost an internal civil war. It sounds like you have the religious fundamentalists versus the nationalists. Is that is that fair or?
I don't think we're there yet. And I think, in fact, that's part of the messaging that the regime does. The regime goes, yeah, I know these are tough times, but it could be worse. We could be in a civil war. And there's something to that. And, I've lived in all these war zones. I've lived among people who are like going through just incredible deprivation or suffering. At the end of the day, people just want to survive.
Sure.
They want to feed their children. They want to, live to the next day. So when the Shah was overthrown, your viewers will, who studied it, if not lived it, it was ultimately general strikes. It was ultimately when the poor came out as well, and they protested and they closed down the country. The Shah chose not to kill 10, 20, 30,000 people, and he abdicated and left. That's not going to happen with this regime. Even if Khamenei is gone, even if, the current line of generals are gone, because there are still 10 million people who have the guns, who have the money, who have the power, who have no place else to go and no intention to go. And they would rather rule a hermit kingdom in ruins than give up. And they've also learned from history certain lessons. Gorbachev tried to reform the Soviet Union. There was a coup. The coup didn't work. The Soviet Union collapsed. Gaddafi, he got killed by his people. He reformed. He gave up his nuclear weapons. The Ukrainians gave up their nuclear weapons, try to get ingratiated with the West. He's no longer with us. In 1989, the Chinese people came on the streets. The Chinese government started to reform. The protests got more severe. They ultimately cracked down. I think those are the lessons these people look at, not because they're pure evil, but because they're pragmatists and they're survivalists, right? And they believe it's okay if the United States bombs Iran, knocks everything out, knocks our power out. The United States will not send 200,000 troops to occupy Iran. God knows, I hope they don't. And they
Hope
know
not.
that. And if you're not on the ground, you could destroy everything you care to. My assessment is that those people who still have the power, who have the guns, are not likely to give up.
Hmm.
And I think that's why we tried all different things over my years since the revolution, right? We've tried, softer policy, harder policy, maximum policy, engagement, lifting sanctions, applying sanctions, reaching out to the opposition, doing this, all in the hope that, those 80 million people are going to ultimately rise up. They're not. One, because they can't afford to. And when they do, the regime cuts them down and will continue to. So that's why I tend to be a bit more pessimistic about things. You know, if I was, in charge of the world, I would be thinking like a case officer, which is, okay, if you're going to weaken the 10 million people who have the power, how do you do that? It's basically sicking them against one another. These tend to deliberately pit rival elements, and that's a means of survival for the ultimate leadership. Because the last thing Putin or Xi wants is for the military and the security services in his country, Putin's or Xi's, to coalesce and then present a threat against them. So you'll notice that they're provocative. They purge people. They pit one against another. They like the infighting, the backbiting. That's very typical of autocracies. Iran is no different. There may be some logic to trying to divide and conquer among those groups to help incentivize elements among those rival factions to take more of an activist approach with our influence and maybe adjusting their policy accordingly as they get more power. But that's just a theory.
I think like most Americans, I scratch my head as to what's happening over there. And, I've spent years in the intelligence community. I've seen many of the same things you've probably seen, a little bit different. I think you have a lot more experience than I do for sure. Um, but I just question, what do we have to gain from a national security perspective? And then I see the other day this video go around of, well, it's Benjamin Netanyahu, and it's just like a 10-minute long video of him saying since 1980 that Iran is 4 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. And it's just he just all over and over and over, he's been saying it for years. They're 4 weeks away. They're 4 weeks away. And I'm of two minds of this, right? I'm like, I'm open. I can be persuaded either way. Like, you tell me. I see Iran shouting "Death to America," right, in one breath, and then I see they're 4 weeks away from a nuclear weapon for years on end. I'm saying, okay, what's really happening here? Like, what? My question is, what do we have to gain? Like, is there real tangible benefit from some type of, if not a war, some type of advanced attack on the Iranians?
I think, politics are always
Yeah.
key in driving U.S. foreign policy and U.S. actions, domestic politics. I think that certainly is at play now, as it's always been in play. It is in the best national security interest of the United States to deny any country who does not yet have a nuclear weapon, let alone a country that has been more or less in a state of war with the United States since 1979. That has actively, you know, conducted atrocities and terrorism and all sorts of things. But in the scheme of things, Iran is not an existential threat to the United States. It's a pain in the neck to the United States, and it causes difficulties, and it creates chaos in a region that's very important to us economically, politically, militarily. So, there have always been arguments about taking a harder line, being proactive in terms of using force as a way to change their policy. I think, in a sense, containment has been, to the extent that you can, has been relatively effective for these, 40 some odd years since the revolution in terms of cost effectiveness, right? Because what's the cost? Well, if you really want to change Iran, you need to do what we did in Iraq in 2002. And that really didn't end terribly well for the United States or the region. It was at a significant cost. And a cost I think we're still paying today in a number of ways. And I think, and the president has said as much. He doesn't want another foreign war like that, in terms of like sending 100, 200,000 U.S. troops, someplace, let alone in the Middle East. But I think there may be, and maybe partially because of what's seen as success in Venezuela, a sense of over optimism that a decapitation approach to Iran will be effective. I don't share that assessment, just in terms of the history and kind of all the components, that sense, and some of it may just be in our sense leverage, trying to see if saber rattling will get them to make concessions, and that hasn't generally worked with Iran, at least anyway, over the years. So like I say, it's hard to 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 accurately define a risk gain calculus.
Mhm.
Where's the advantage in doing that?
Why does Iran chant "Death to America"? At least the regime control. Why do they do that at all?
So Iran is, in its own title, a revolutionary regime. What does a revolutionary need? It needs a villain. It needs a bad guy. It needs that to legitimize itself and legitimize a very repressive regime and a very difficult economy. Oh, we can't invest more in the economy because, the devil Americans, the devil Israelis, right? So it allows them to give themselves credibility and legitimacy. It gives them a way to message the necessity of deprivation. Here's why we have water shortages. It's not we don't want to do more, but we can't invest more because the devil Americans and the devil Israelis. So it is a requirement to a revolutionary regime to have something against which to revolt. Shah's been gone since, for 46 years or what have you. So you need an enemy. The United States is and Israel are the natural enemies. That's why there's still death to America and all that, because they need that to survive.
Uh, you mentioned Venezuela very very briefly, but I wanted to talk about Venezuela because it's interesting to me for a few reasons. One is you have this integration of special operations units, obviously an advanced intel operation that had to occur to understand his residence and
Mhm.
all the things they knew about him. And then you have what I call the perfect soup for public misunderstanding, and that's directed energy weapons. So this is why I call this the perfect soup for public misunderstanding in regard to directed energy weapons. Um, they're secretive, right? They're secret government programs that are doing this. This is not they're secretive programs, but everyone kind of knows they're happening. The weapons are super powerful, right? These are physics based weapons. The impact is invisible, so it's not like you can see, microwaves.
Mm,
And then also you have a storied history of Russia testing these things out. So you have all of these things surrounding the intelligence operation, the soft coordination. I mean, I just think from a historian perspective, almost you look at that operation, you go, wow, that was something. To get out of there with no American casualties. Obviously, we saw at the State of the Union, a pilot from the 160th received the Medal of Honor. He was injured, still piloted the aircraft, saved everybody's life. I mean, just wow, right? Mind blowing stuff that will be a movie one day for sure.
mhm.
Um, so I want to talk about directed energy weapons real quick. Not real quick. I want to just talk about what they are. So, for everyone that's still kind of learning this topic, here's a quick rundown on directed energy. These systems use highly focused electromagnetic energy, such as lasers or high power microwaves, to deliver energy to a target at the speed of light. Obviously, disabling drones, damaging sensors, or shutting down electronics. While they operate on the same basic physics as everyday technologies like Wi Fi or 5G, the critical difference is the power and focus. So, no, you don't have to worry about your consumer devices giving you the same thing that uh, happened in Venezuela, right? What the president called the discombobulator. Uh, and we will talk about that for a second. Um, while directed energy weapons concentrate enormous amounts of energy into a tightly controlled beam, you don't have to worry about your consumer devices because those are wide beam, right? Like 5G, all that stuff's really, spread out. Like think about your cell phone signal. These are massive beams going everywhere as opposed to being directed. So that's why you don't have to worry about them in consumer electronics. I hope. Today's systems are primarily defensive, designed to counter drones and missiles, and although satellites and space based weapons are often discussed, real world limitations like power generation and heat management make orbital energy weapons extremely challenging. So I call this the perfect soup for public misunderstanding, but I think the most important thing for the public to know is that it's all based on physics, and you can't break the laws of physics. So if you can't break the laws of physics, it's not really practical to, let's say, shoot directed energy from a satellite. You just need so much energy, right? And maybe one day we get to the point where we can collect so much energy from the sun we can use it like that. But today it's just not feasible. My question on directed energy weapons is what are your thoughts on this technology? The public understanding of what the president calls the discombobulator. Like, what are your high level thoughts on this type of weapon?
So some years ago, my elder kids, for my birthday, one of my birthday presents was a T-shirt, and the T-shirt said, "Everything I learned about life, I learned from Star Trek." And even going back to the old series, which is me, when I think about Star Trek, phasers like on kill, on stun, all the different things you sort of saw back then. Um, Theoretically, the idea of directed energy being weaponized has always been possible, right? Theoretically possible. And certainly energy of any sort can serve for something degrading conduct some degrading activity, right? You think about jammers, and for forever we've had electronic warfare, jamming radars and sensors and such like that. I'm hardly a physicist or a scientist of any sort, though I've probably played one in spying at some point. But if it's theoretically possible, then it's just a matter of, do we know enough? Can we miniaturize enough? Can we develop hardware enough, software enough to use it? The then Soviet Union and Russia, which followed, was long using energy as a means of collection, right? To be able to collect signals, vibrations, flickers of light, all of which could translate into text, conversation, audio. So as long back as the 70s, I believe, and certainly into the 80s, the United States government was aware that our facilities were being hit with a lot of, mostly microwaves back then, but directed energy. They would focus on things like fluorescent lights, because fluorescent lights, you turn them on and they kind of flicker. They're always flickering. Fluorescent lights are constantly flickering. You don't see it, but they are, and they react to sound. And so, we were doing it as well, but one could use a type of energy, microwave largely, to collect audio from that, or from current. So those of your audience work in SCIFs, classified facilities, there's red power and black power. Why are there differences? Well, because one type of power is more carefully insulated so that the vibrations from it don't radiate, that they can't be collected by an energy device. So clearly, as technology is advanced, you know, mankind has learned how to harness this in much more targeted ways, as you were saying, in very laser-like, targeted, not broad. And in the earliest days, it was for collecting information. Then we got better at using it for electronic warfare in terms of jamming radars. It tied into cyber, right, for our ability to turn lights off the city, turn lights on, whatever, close off the internet and such like that. So there's plenty of open source technology that people could read about that speaks about this in theory. Now, the idea of weaponizing it for harm against personnel, anti-personnel, and such, I think the Russians, whether it was deliberate or not, were hurting people in our embassy and our consulates in the Soviet Union and in Russia from this bombardment of microwave energy. Mike Beck, so former NSA senior director, I think, got sick in the 90s during a visit to Russia, along with a colleague. They both came away from that trip with Parkinson's disease. People
Unbelievable.
don't, it's not contagious, Parkinson's, right? And yet they both, you know, same trip, they come back, and Mike just recently died. So I know his name has come up a lot. The Soviet Union and the Russians were also willing to use devices that were harmful to health to track CIA officers. In the 80s, they had what's called, what your readers could look up as spy dust. And it shouldn't have been visible to the eye. It only was if they used too much. But it was a chemical that they'd leave about places where a suspect CIA case officer was likely to touch. And then, whatever you touch, once you touched it, you could track that. They could track that. The only reason we knew about spy dust was because we had a KGB agent working for us who said, hey, they're using spy dust, and here's a sample. I was serving overseas at the time, and because of the type of ops we did, and the Russian intel threat, we were given, okay, here's countermeasures for dealing with spy dust. So that an intel service could use this in a way to degrade or harm is not entirely shocking. I think the Russians themselves have a long history, certainly goes back throughout my professional lifetime and such. And if we're advancing our understanding of it and now using it in a very focused way, possibly to mitigate the need for lethality, if we could discombobulate people instead of killing them, okay, well, that's swell. But you know, it's not even recognized and acknowledged, so we're way off from there being any rules of the road in terms of how to use something like this, like there are for chemical weapons or biological weapons, or to some extent nuclear weapons.
Let me just read real quick what on the ground accounts from Venezuela. This was direct from them. They described how Maduro's gunmen were bleeding through the nose and vomiting blood. Now, I think we can all agree, from an American perspective, that this is a good thing, right? We went in there, we used what the president called the discombobulator. They obviously ran their op, and no Americans were killed. Great. Even the people that were discombobulated probably survived, and maybe they'll recover to some extent. Where it gets a little funky is, there's been officers, intelligence officers from CIA and other agencies that have suffered massive wounds from potentially foreign adversaries using these weapons. And just my take on this thing is that whatever that is, whatever it comes down as being, like what the ground truth happened in all these instances, the government owes it to those people to get to the bottom of it. It owes it to those intelligence professionals who go out on a limb and literally risk their life to serve the country just as much as any military person does. And in some cases, you could argue in many more dangerous types of scenarios, our government owes it to them to find out what happened exactly and to give them the full treatment, a full benefit that they deserve to recover, hopefully, if they can. Some of them cannot recover from these types of attacks. In the United States, there's a lot of questions about who is making this stuff in the United States. Look, we know Russia's making it. China's probably making these types of weapons. All advanced countries are going to make these types of weapons. In the United States, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and L3 Harris all publicly have some type of tie to directed energy. And then you have DARPA, Air Force Research Lab, Naval Research Laboratory, and then the Army. Now, most of these cases, most of this research and focus is on counter UAS, ship defense, missile defense, and electronic disruption. So if we can take out your equipment, we don't need to hit you with these types of weapons. And, it's just an area that I'm interested in how we apply this. I don't want to go in and discombobulate everywhere just because we can. And I just hope that we use it responsibly, especially seeing how these intel officers have been affected by this. Do you want to mention anything in this regard?
I mean, clearly there's debate. We've got two successive administrations, so two different parties, have both maintained the same line on the issue, for reasons that you know probably more difficult to sustain, given current times and given the current exposure of the reality that these weapons certainly exist now, and theoretically could have in different scales. So I think really it's going to be more an issue of, you know, what do the American people want to know and what type of pressure they put on their government, whichever, government it is at any time, to say, hey, we really want to know more about that. But I think one of the unfortunate realities of our country is that the people who make up the armed forces, the security services, CIA, bureau, whatever, they don't really have a huge lobby in the sense that they represent minority of the country. I mean, what is it? 1% of the people serve in the armed forces or something like that. So if it's not really affecting Americans, typical Americans, all Americans, and it's really just affecting a limited community of people who have parents or siblings or kids in the service, in the agency, or whatever like that, then that's probably going to equate to less pressure on political representatives to, hey, we want answers and we want to know what's going on. So I think that's one of the, one of the realities of where we are.
I think it kind of goes back to that perfect soup of of public misunderstanding because it's hard
Yeah,
to prove. It's invisible. It's
yeah,
invisible. How do you know that this was a directed energy weapon?
right.
There was a intelligence officer recently that Catherine Herod. She's a investigative journalist. She had on, and he talked about his spinal cord feeling like it was on fire, and his wife suffered damages as well, and that's inside the United States. So whatever it is, we need to figure out what's going on there, especially if it's on U.S. soil, and certainly we don't want these things, any weapon like that here, targeting our intel professionals at all. Um, it seems like a crazy technology. It's a new thing. Everyone's still learning about what the capabilities are. In the right hands, it can obviously do great things, and I hope that we treat it uh, responsibly. Okay, I wanted to shift over to uh, so we kind of talked about this shift in tactics that the CIA has. It's more overt, like just posting stuff on Twitter. What are your thoughts on maybe even people like yourself that they come out of the CIA, they have a book. I think I saw a joke. It's like how do you know someone's worked at the CIA? It's you've read their book, right? Um, and that's I think it's great. I think there's stories that need to be told, and I think actually that the CIA and the intelligence apparatus writ large should probably declassify things a lot faster. I think there's some great stories in there about things about operations that occurred that protected Americans that people never learn about because of sources and methods that we need to protect. But I think it'd be important to know for people to know, like, hey, there is value in the CIA. There is value in NGA and NSA and NRO and the hundred billions of dollars that we spend on our intelligence apparatus. You talk a little bit about ubiquitous security state, so I wanted to ask you about that a little bit more. But what are your thoughts on this pipeline of CIA to show business?
Wow, I wish I could find it myself and get there, Um, there you go. I'm ready. One of the things the agency has never done well, and for obvious limitations, is be able to brag about itself and message. And they've tried the last couple of years. There's commercials, something a little bit campy, and there's ads and such like that. You open on LinkedIn and CIA is out there and stuff like that. But we need really good people to join the agency. The agency does, I think, phenomenal work, and has over my the entirety of my lifetime. Right? It saves lives. It prevents wars. It wins wars, based on the secrets it steals, based on its ability to inform the president with excellent, objective, critical intelligence that lets us have the advantage. And we need the best people to do that, the best of the brightest, right? That was used to be a catchphrase for the agency. And I think lots of people are just naturally averse to, oh, the CIA, they kill people and do these bad things. And, you got to like jump out of helicopters and wear trench coats. I don't own a trench coat, by the way, just for situational awareness. And I think there's a lot of good to be done by telling stories that tell the good and the bad and the ugly so people can make informed decisions on, like, yeah, I want to be that. Now, my book is often critical of the agency, particularly in that error, that the war on terror era, but at the same time, it's a love letter. It's basically saying, thank God for the agency. Thank God we have a service like this and people like this who risk their lives for no notoriety. We don't get all the medals. We don't get to go to receptions with like, fruit salad on our tunics and stuff like that. We are in anonymity for the most part. And the American people, I think, are entitled to have a little bit more transparency. I think one of the reasons in the Reform Act of 2004, the Intel Reform Act, was indeed to allow the American people a better sense of where are my tax dollars going? What are the Intel services doing? It wasn't like, give them all the secrets for goodness sakes, but they have elected representatives who oversee the intelligence community for that same purpose, right? It's a representative democracy, isn't it? But I think a bit more transparency and acknowledging where, okay, we screwed this up, but we learned our lesson, and here's how we're applying is in my opinion, having been undercover for 34 years of my life, reasonable and useful as a business model to get good people to keep coming in, right? To get the right people to keep coming in. We operate everywhere in the world, and we need to steal secrets by getting to blend in with societies, relate to people from different cultures and such like that. You know, yeah, we have masks and stuff like that, but I'm not going to ride my bicycle, as I was saying earlier, my little story about bumping into a Russian. He's riding his bike, I'm riding my bike. Yeah, that'll work in Russia, but it's not going to work in Nigeria probably quite as well. I'll probably stand out a little bit more and such like that. And we have an incredible country, incredible resources, people who know history and languages and culture and all that kind of stuff. And I really want to see the agency attract people beyond the same elite schools and the same institutes and former military and stuff like that. I want to see people coming from, you know, communities where they understand how people here speak and talk and think and want to serve their country. So I think getting a little bit more out there is great. I think for some of us, it's an exercise in catharsis. In a sense, for me, I had a lot of pent up angst after 4 decades of spying, and the pressures and the stresses, and in some cases, the guilt of people who were good people who I put in harm's way for a reason I stand by. I have no regrets for doing it, but it doesn't mean I still feel some, that was hard on them for having elected that life. So yeah, so I think there's a good feature to it. I think it could get a little overdone. I think you got to be careful and respect the secrets, right? But I think sometimes that gets a little blurry. So every time I write something, and it doesn't matter what I write. I mean, I can write a Christmas card almost. I've got to send it to the CIA for review, and I'm being facetious, right? But if I write an article, or nowadays I've actually started writing novels, right? So God willing, I'll get a novel out there. I've got to send it to the agency, yay! And the agency reviews it and they look for classified. It's a very subjective scope at times where they'll say, oh, this is classified. And I'll go, no, it's not. It's in the public news. Well, it's classified because you're saying it. But it was reported on by every newspaper in the world. The guy actually said, yes, that was me, and you're saying it's a secret. Yes, because you were CIA. So if you say it, then we're acknowledging it. That gets a little overdone at times. And so not to disparage my former colleagues, I want to maintain good relations with them, and it's usually a negotiation. I could usually go back and forth with them. I could usually find
Right.
a form of words that go, okay, we're okay with that. So, like, if instead of me saying, Alexei whatever was a CIA spy, which I'd never do, even though Alexei might have been a defector who Putin talked about having defected, because he said that Alexei guy who worked for CIA, he's no good, he was a drunk. That's what the Russians do. They want to undermine the story of a defector. But if I say, according to the New York Times, in a January 2022 article, Putin said Alexei whatever was a CIA agent, that I could say. So it gets a little weird. That's okay. But
former CIA people in the public spotlight now. Andrew
Yeah.
Bustamante, John Kirikow,
Mm.
Rick Prado, who I had on. You got to check out that episode if you like. If you like listening to Doug, you're gonna love Rick Prado as well. Maybe I'll put a link. I'll put a link down there somewhere.
Rick's a good
And
guy. Rick's a classmate of mine.
yeah,
There's
Rick.
nobody I'd rather have protecting my six than Rick Prado.
And I'll tell you what. If you like this spy stuff, you're gonna love that episode. I'll put a link down there. You mentioned something about integrity. And don't think that I missed. I don't think that I missed you say, "Oh yes, we do masks and stuff." I want to ask you about that,
Sure.
if you can. And then you mentioned a little bit about guilt. I want to ask you about that later too, because I think that a lot of intelligence professionals can relate to that feeling. Um, but I don't want to skip over this either. So recently, John Radcliffe removed 17 intelligence products from the CIA database. This is very public. He put it out on all the social medias and stuff like that. Um, and we don't need to go into the contents of what it was. It's a very political move, right? It was obviously these were political things that were one administration put up and then another one puts down. My question isn't on whether you agree or disagree with the politics. My question is, are we doing this the right way? I was thinking about this the other day. Every single 4 years, maybe 8 years, when the new administration comes in, we lop off the top of our agencies and we put new leadership in there. What type of turmoil does that cause to everybody else? And then you always hear about this, the deep state. Man, I think there's probably a ring of people that are just like, cool, new leadership, don't care. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Um, is that an effective method to run an organization? I mean, imagine you're working your job and then you get a new boss every 4 years. And like, no matter what, you're getting a new boss, or maybe even 2 years, because sometimes they just get yanked while in term. Is this an effective way to do business?
I mean, it's rooted into our constitution and our government, right? We have turnover. There's a reason for the turnover, right? It's considered a way to further and strengthen the democracy, right? So we don't have the same leadership for 30, 40 years like Russia does or China does and such like that. But with that, then the leader, has ownership of the executive agencies. So you serve at the pleasure of the president, the director, whatever like that. Is just, sort of reality what it is. I think the the difference is that the skeleton, if you would, the infrastructure of the national security apparatus is pretty constant in terms of the rank and file, and most of those folks from a day-to-day basis, their priorities are changed by a new administration, which then can in turn affect the resources that they get for their particular target or job or such like that. But, for the most part, at least in my experience, politics didn't really permeate down to that. You're not, when you're doing a surveillance detection route to meet an agent, you're not thinking, well, that was a really interesting speech the president gave today. I wonder how that's going to affect. Yeah, I mean, you're constantly aware, obviously, of what's going on in the world because it trickles down and stuff. But I would always tell junior officers, don't be distracted. You've got a job, focus on your job. Your job is, you're in the trenches, you're out in the street, to do that and to focus on that. So I think that's why a lot of other governments say, oh, your democracy is too chaotic and such like that. There's kind of a reason for some of that chaos to allow us, I guess, based on our roots in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And now I'm way out of my lane here, but to preserve the values that we believe make the United States what it is, and it comes with good and it comes with bad, and you know depends on who's running the ship, I guess.
Do you find in your teaching students, you mentioned elite schools, recruiting from elite schools, which I think every organization would like to recruit from the most elite schools in the country. Um, and you're teaching young people, human intelligence, which is an awesome is it a course they can take at Georgetown? Is that what that is?
Yeah, so I teach human intelligence operations at Georgetown.
Take that
So
course.
it's a lot of
Yeah,
fun. We do a lot of practical work. I let students do dead drops, bumps, go up to
cool.
strangers, try to get a conversation going, signals, clandestine signals. So they do a lot of practical work. So it's a lot of fun.
Okay, and then are those young students that are maybe going into the intelligence apparatus, national security apparatus, do you find them to be, let me put it the right way, are they just as political as they've always been, or is there more, are the younger generation, the 18 to 25-year-olds, are they just good patriots? Like, how would you categorize their mindset going into their professional careers?
You're talking about a difficult sampling, right? Because if these are people that want to go into national security, they obviously are coming from a different mindset, a different optic, and such like that. They're probably people who've always been very interested in politics and interested in world events and such like that. Otherwise, it wouldn't lead them to that pursuit. So I don't necessarily know that's a great sampling in terms of the greater whole. You can compare it maybe generationally to is this generation that's interested? How are they different than the generation before them and such? I mean, if you were going to do something like that, that would probably be a more fair assessment. I mean, the students I have, they're there because they want to be there, and they're there because they want to serve in the intel community or somewhere in national security. They want to serve their country. They're prioritizing public service over making money or private sector because if they can afford to go into Georgetown and some of them certainly get help, they probably have the means to pursue you know medicine, law, cryptology, whatever you say, but they've chosen that field. And I mean, I've had students. I had one student, lovely young man. He came from a family where mom and dad were doctors. He was the youngest of four. All his siblings were doctors, and he was, a liberal arts major. So I said, well, that's got to be rough at Christmas time, going back home. But this was a choice he made because that's where his heart was. He could have gone into medicine like everybody else, but he chose not to. So I mean, I certainly see patriotism. I see all that same passion and such out of my students. But compare them to 330 million Americans. I would like to see, as I said earlier, CIA go outside of that group, right? Because, we were talking about getting into the agency and specifically going to the DO, the Director of Operations, and specifically within that, being a case officer. There's no school for being a case officer. There's no minor leagues. There's no college football, right? If you go and you become a Russian areas specialist and you study it, you get a master's and you learn Russian and you write really well, that's great credentials for the Directorate of Analysis. But to be a case officer, it's about your life experience. It's how you deal with adversity. How do you relate with people? Do you adapt to dynamic circumstances? Do you think on your feet? Are you risk averse? Do you have integrity? All those are basic character traits, and they're not reflective of, a master's, a PhD, or whatever like that. They're a reflection of who you are because that's what a case officer uses, not they're having read every volume of Thucydides and such like that. So I those people are everywhere, in America. They're at community colleges or whatever like that. So I would, I've always trumpeted, hey, we need to broaden our search for people who have integrity, who are smart, clever, think on their feet, want to serve their country. They're not all just going to Georgetown and Stanford.
That's great, and I think that's actually probably true for most careers. Actually, if I look at like the technical requirements to do the work that we do at my company, GeoOwl, we're doing geospatial intelligence. We're also doing cool mapping and all that sort of things. I can teach people how to do that. I mean, I really can. I can teach you how to do the technical stuff, but it's the people that come in and have great attitudes, you know, they have integrity, like you talked about. They're the ones that succeed. I mean, even if they
Yeah.
start technically at a lower level, they're the ones that pretty soon differentiate themselves, because they have that tenacity to do well. So I think you're spot on in that regard. I'm just gonna agree with you there. Um, so so I think what if I'm a senior intel officer or decision maker, are you pretty happy with what you're gonna get as your next round of recruits in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, every generation changes the face of the institutions they join, right? So as generations come in, they bring a lot of good with them. I mean, everybody that I teach today grew up, with a cell phone in front of their face and a laptop and such like that. So where I still have to like go through the exercise of thinking through certain aspects of technology, they live it, and technology is so influential on everything we do, and certainly in national security, and absolutely when it comes to espionage. So I think they're there. I think as generations go, they're just reflective of, the times and such. So there's no generation I ever remember that looked at the next generation without saying, they had it easy and they don't work as hard as we do. I mean, I'm an old white guy. I'm sure, my friends sit around. We go, look at those meddling kids today. It's unfortunate, but I think people do that. I'm a baby boomer. I'm still a member of the baby boomers. And I remember going to my first COS conference, right? My first time as chief of station. Chief of station is the senior CIA person in charge of a post in whatever the country is, right? They're also the director of national intelligence rep. They are the senior U.S. intelligence officer at post. And so there'd be like a conference, and they bring back all the COSs from that particular region. And they go back and they tell us the latest and the greatest, and here's what we need to do, and priorities and realities and whatever. And I was the youngest at the time because I was just barely a baby boomer. And all these are all old white guys. And man, they were just lambasting Generation X. And everything they said about Generation X, I've heard Generation X say about the millennials. And everything I heard X say about the millennials, I hear the millennials saying about Gen Z. So, I mean, it's just part of life. But as a pragmatist and as a spy, always looking to find advantage, I think you take what they offer, which is a lot more tools than I brought in. They're smarter, they're better schooled in my mind in a lot of ways. They're more computer savvy, and those are tremendous advantages. You might need to work with them more on the people side because many of these people have grown up talking to people via screens as opposed to really going out and being with people and being in different situations. So those are things that we might see as a consideration with the next generation coming up. Are they as well versed with simply the skills of people? Right? Have they spent as much time in different environments with different types of people? Or have they grown up, they were part of the COVID age and they did all their schooling on a computer for a year or two? I think those are things we might see some residual challenges from, but that's just, speaking scientifically and just hazarding a guess.
From a practical standpoint, you mentioned some of the qualities that the agency looks for people, and even some of the ways they might test for that. But what about from a maybe a common everyday perspective of practical use? Like, what would be the most practical use of some of the things that you've learned throughout your career that maybe the average person walking around say, "Oh, I should probably do that." Like, can you help them get a girlfriend? Could you help them,
Yeah.
start a business? Like, what are those things that you can really say that your experience
No offense, Nick, but
flows
if I
into?
could, I'd be on 60 Minutes and not talking to you. Um, but what I can tell them is, and this has nothing to do with the time in the world. It's being situationally aware. I walk around on the streets and I'm always like scanning. I don't want to look like I'm scanning, but I'm scanning. Most people are like staring down at their phone. I don't know how many people I see almost get like run down by cars and bikes and such like that. But situational awareness goes beyond just like your physical reality. It's also cyber. I get like email things and invites sometimes from people I know, but I go, that doesn't look right. And I don't like open links without going back and going, hey, Jim, Jane, did you send me that? And whatever. I mean, I may be a little on the paranoid side. I was a spy. But I mean, just yesterday, I got an email from the housing and development about these new electronic locks that they have on, and it gave a link. And I wrote them first. I said, "Did you really send that?" Before I press that link. So most cyber attacks are still based on human vulnerability. It's not some great brain or algorithm or giant machine. It's targeting somebody because if you've done your work, you've done a little homework on things that interest them, that they'll open something or do something, and that gets you inside, not some amazing, supercomputer gizmos. So being scrupulous of that, being scrupulous of the news. When I teach my classes at Georgetown, I tell the students, particularly in my analytic course, I tell them my main goal is not to make you into intelligence officers, not in 14 weeks, certainly, but to make you more savvy consumers of information. How do you assess the information you get? Where does it come from? How do you vet it? How do you process it? I think that's an easy learn for everybody. And, today in the world, the reality is a lot of people source their news from things that are already aligned with their predisposed point of views. And that's fine, so long as you're still willing to challenge it at times, not just accept everything you hear blindly because it came from your favorite news station or your favorite media. Do some due diligence and do some research. Be a savvy consumer of information, and it'll make you a lot wiser.
I'll tell you what, I really like Grok because that's XAI's uh, AI. What do you call that? A person? I don't know. What is Grok? It's their language model.
It's just
Um, what I like about it is it'll tell you like, hey, this is coming from this side and this is coming from that side. That's one thing I have to commend Elon Musk on, and his focus on building AI that is truth seeking, and I think that's critically important. Absolutely. And now I think Grokopedia, which is like competing with Wikipedia, has like a growing number of source rankings for like Google, right? Like Google looks and ranks pages because it's truthful. It's giving you both sides of the equation. So I hope people start to use Grok a little bit more, because some of the other language models I'm not so sure about. Um, you, you, we could talk about AI probably all day, but I want to get back into the real world, because the real world, like you said, everyone's looking down at their phones and they got their AirPods on, and
yeah.
they're on the metro. They're kind of in this world. Um, CIA officer walks into a room. How are you gauging the room? What are you looking for to keep situationally aware? Like you go to a restaurant or something. What are the types of things you think about as a CIA officer as opposed to the general public?
I'm looking for the atmospherics of the room. I'm looking for where people are situated, where their eyes are, what they're doing, how the room is laid out. Occupational hazard. I never want to sit near the front, so particularly not by windows. I try to go to the back, have a bigger ability to scan the entirety. I mean, these are things I told my kids growing up
Do you
for their
still
own
do
safety.
this?
Oh
Do you
God,
still?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I can't help myself. I can help but looking for surveillance when I'm driving and walking and noticing people and go, I saw that person 2 blocks ago, and da da da. And yeah, I mean, it's just that's sort of an occupational hazard, but that gets right back to the situational awareness. I told my kids, you go into a movie theater, find where the exits are, look where they are, know where you are. God forbid something happens. Same thing in a restaurant, same thing everywhere. Who's looking at you instead of what they should be looking at? Why are they looking at you? Should they be looking down, or where are their eyes? I mean, these are things that are just sort of naturally built in after a lifetime of doing it, but they're also good habits. And I tell you, some of those things I came with to the agency. So I grew up in a really bad neighborhood in the Bronx, and there was a lot of crime and a lot of violence, and you had to know how to ride a subway with that 1,000-yard stare, but still looking around, not making eye contact, but yet still seeing everything around you. I mean, that's just was a survival tool. which I, like I said, I, much to my children's, pain, uh, you know, punish them with telling them that over and over again. But they do it, luckily, for the most part.
Tell me about masks and disguise and profile changes, all these cool things that the CIA does.
So that's what we call it. We call it a profile change, and the idea is to recognize and ultimately elude surveillance, right? So if you think about it, and you think about operating in Russia or China or Iran, a very, very difficult counterintelligence environment, places where they'll just put surveillance on many members of the U.S. government representatives there, right? Just assuming, okay, some of these people are CIA, some they may suspect the CIA, some they may know as CIA. So their job is to identify who your agents are, because they're trying to catch our agents in their government, and our job is to meet with, communicate with our agents in the safest, most secure possible manner. So there's many ways to communicate with the agents. There's in-personal communications, right, where we do things digitally, not commercial devices, but secure digital things that we might have given them special equipment or satellites or whatever. But we do have personal meetings. And so if we're going to have a personal meeting, we want to make sure that we're not surveilled to that meeting, and then they identify who our agent is, and God forbid the agent gets arrested killing. So part of our process sometimes is to conduct a profile change, right? So good stories, there's many good stories, I guess you could tell, that are out there in the public. But what that means is becoming somebody different. And that could be as subtle as just maybe changing clothing items you're wearing, to actually putting on like a mask and becoming another person, looking like somebody completely different, or maybe looking like somebody you want them to recognize who's not you. So a typical profile change is you are running what we call a surveillance detection route to meet your agent. It's over a period of time, changing areas and whatever like that. The idea is you're trying to look very natural. You don't want the opposition, you don't want your rivals to think you're a spy. You want to look like how a person naturally looks when they're going out in the outings and, going shopping or whatever like that, because the more they suspect you, the more people you'll have following you. And the more people you have following you, the harder it is to determine if you're being surveilled, because they can keep changing out people. So you don't have a chance to recognize the same person or the same car over, time, distance, and change of direction. So what we might want to do when we know we're under surveillance, so we know there's a possibility we're under surveillance, but we need to get away anyway, because we absolutely positively have to conduct this operational act. Maybe it's a personal meeting. Maybe you're putting down what your audience would call a dead drop. We'd probably more call like a foot emplacement, some package that is masked, disguised to look blend in with the environment, but it actually has secret information or money or something on the inside, and we just need to get away. And one thing we do is to change our profile. So I may be, going about my day, and I'm taking a cab someplace or Uber, and then I walk someplace and I stop someplace, and all along I'm trying to register if I have surveillance. And if I do, and I have a sense of how far back they are, or if I don't, either way is fine, I'm looking for an opportunity where I could start changing my profile, looking different. So it's easier to do when there's enough weather that you could wear jackets and hats and stuff like that. So I may go from, a jacket I have and pants and a hat, and I may find a gap where they're not close enough behind me and I'm blending with the crowd. I start changing things, taking off a jacket. Maybe it's a reversible jacket. Maybe it's a different hat. If I have some real solitude, I turn someplace where I know nobody's looking. I may have, tearaway clothes, like a tearaway Velcro, pants or jacket. I may be out in a suit and wind up changing into, jeans and a t-shirt. So those are profile changes. But we also go beyond that. We actually fabricate masks. And sometimes the mask is to blend in with the environment. I'm a white guy. So if I'm operating in the Middle East or Africa or South Asia or the Far East, I don't want to look like this. I could look like somebody who's natural to that environment, particularly if I speak the language, right? And, I spoke Russian, I spoke Arabic, French, and such like that. But sometimes we make masks to look like somebody else. And so a good example is, lots of good examples from Russia that I could tell because they're out there in the public record. And you're a case officer in Moscow Station. You need to make your meeting. Unfortunately, you're getting a lot of surveillance, but somebody else in the station or maybe the embassy isn't. So they make you look like that person so that when you come out of the building, they're still waiting for you to come out, and they're not going to follow this other person. There's a story a colleague tells where, the Russians knew he was CIA. He needs to make a meeting, and he was working on his car. And so he's working on his car and he's going back in the house to get things for his car and he's coming out doing things. He has to keep going back and forth, which people do when they're working on their car, right? But one of those times when he came out, it wasn't him. It was somebody else who had a mask to look exactly like him, wearing the exact same clothes, had about the same height and whatever like that, and kept working on the car. So the Russians kept watching him working on the car, but they weren't watching the case officer. Case officer, meanwhile, got out the back and took off and made his meeting. Jonah Mendez, who's a wonderful lady, wrote a book about this. She was chief of disguise. I forget what the title of her book is. The book came out about a year or so ago. And she writes about this. Her husband was also a former chief of disguise. He passed away, Rudy Mendez. If any of your audience is familiar with the movie Argo, where it depicts the time that the CIA had to exfiltrate several American diplomats who got caught behind when the American embassy was seized in Tehran, and they took refuge in the Canadian ambassador's house. Um, it was a combination of disguise and false documents, making them look like Canadians, part of a Canadian film crew, that we got them out of the country. And Rudy Mendez, Shauna's husband, was the mastermind. He actually went to Tehran to do that, along with another CIA officer who only recently had been revealed there because they were undercover, and he recently passed. Did that by using disguises, document forgeries, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean that's espionage, and those are just a couple of quick examples.
Well, that's cool. I think people get a kick out of that sort of thing. I'm sure your students do as well. You talked a little bit earlier about guilt, and I just want to touch on this because I think this is something that a lot of professionals in the intelligence community and the national security community and military members as well, there is a certain weight that over time you start to reflect on things. You're like, I did choose this life. I did, participate in these things. Do you think about that? Do you think about those things?
Sure, you do. I don't see how you don't. If you're good at your job as a case officer, you need to manipulate somebody into doing something that's incredibly dangerous. And that while it may be a wonderful, worthy goal for society and generations to come, it's awfully hazardous. And you do that by earning their trust. And once you earn their trust, you are manipulating their drives in life, their hopes and dreams and fears to get them to cross that Rubicon and spy. And not just for you as a friend. An agent isn't really an agent unless they're working for an institution. Right? I've got to be able to have this agent work with my colleagues and other people, not to think I'm only doing this because Doug's a great guy and I love Doug to death and I trust him. They've got to realize that they are in it with the United States government, in it with the CIA, and the CIA will do everything they can to protect them by using the best tradecraft, putting their security first. But things happen. It's espionage. It's the real world. It's a battlefield of itself, and we take losses. And agents are aware of that when we recruit them. They need to be, right? They need to understand what it is we're asking them to do, why we're asking them to do it, what they'll get from doing it tangibly, and what we will do for them. And never make promises that you can't keep. But you become really close with these people. You have to. And to become close with them, you have to give up part of yourself. Used car salesmen are not good recruiters. They're funny, they can be the center of attention. You want to listen to tell jokes, but you're not going to trust your life to them. You need somebody you connect with, like a friend. But for the case officer, they've got to keep that detachment in a sense because, sort of like commanding troops in combat, you love your troops, but you need to put them in harm's way, right, for the mission, even though some of them may not come back. The same with handling an agent, and that same dynamic exists where, I don't regret it. I'm doing it for a reason. I'm doing it for the safety of my people and security, and ideally for their people. But there's a cost, and there's a cost to you as a human being, having to give of yourself to be sincere, to be vulnerable with them, because you've got to be vulnerable to become friends with somebody, right? There's that sense of mutual obligation and benefit of the doubt. That's just friendship. And that's what you're trying to create with your agent, but still with you having total control. So yeah, that's never far away. You think about that sometimes, and it takes a piece of you, I would say. That's different than like PTSD, which service members get in combat, which I probably had coming from a war zone I served in, where after a year of dodging missiles and bombs and stuff like all the time, I was not myself, and I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't realize it like for a long time later. But what I'm talking about is that your soul, right, and you feel it. But I tell my students that, and I believe this. I feel the guilt. I feel like oof, but I don't feel regret. I believed in what I did. I believed it was a cause. I believed I was selling a cause and selling a product, and that product was America and America's strength and America's security to do the right thing. So while I served, I never felt regret.
And I think what you're talking about is exactly why patriotism does matter, right? You have to love the country you're serving if you're going to do things that are personally taxing and difficult. And I think over time, if you don't actually believe in it, then you're gonna start to question. You're gonna spiral into areas that you don't want to be in. So I want to just ask you one final question, and then we can go about our day. But real quick before I do ask that question, make sure if you're listening to this, you go check out Doug's book, The Recruiter: Spying in the Lost Art of American Intelligence. I'm going to put the links in the description. You need to check out this book if you're interested in this space at all. Doug provides some awesome details in there that you're not going to want to miss. So definitely go check out that book. And Doug, my last question for you is, what is your favorite memory of your entire career in CIA? What is your favorite memory that you're willing to share with us here today?
It's not some operational conquests, actually. It's images of places I've been and people I've known. And I think the greatest gift that I've had by serving, some 40 years and much of that in the foreign field was I saw the world. I met, I had meals with Bedouins in the middle of the desert, away from anybody. I stood at the Berlin Wall in November 1989 as it was first coming down and East Germans were first crossing. When I think on my memories, I think on these images that pop in my mind. It's not writing up some sensational intel report. It's not getting away from surveillance and eluding them. Those are great stories. I love those stories. And then if you say, "Oh, what's your favorite stories?" I'll tell my favorite stories to the extent I can. But if you're talking about my favorite memory or images, it's things like that. It's like dots in history that I felt I was part of, that I was part of that moment, part of that historical moment, and usually engaged with a person on the other side. I was at the Berlin Wall meeting a very sensitive agent. I was out with the Bedouins developing somebody who would become a very good agent in that government security service. But I think of the moments, the images, and the people at the time. Those are my biggest kind of rewards from a life spent in the shadows.
Well, Doug, thank you so much. And I think I speak for a lot of people when I say thank you for now sharing what you've learned with us here today and then also to your students. I think everyone needs to check out your book. And I'm just very thankful that you were able to join us today. Um, if you've listened this far in, I appreciate you as well. My name is Nick. This is the NDS show. This is Doug London. Take care, y'all.